Today's topic is buying games for consoles you don't own, or actually buying consoles for buying games for consoles that you're never going to own. And what sparked this off is I'm a big fan of emulation, but I'm not a fan of piracy. I mean, it has its place in the gaming world, and I do understand that there are thousands and thousands of games that are never going to see the light of day. They're never going to get put on a store or a virtual console, and lots of people want to keep those games, preserve those games, and technically emulation and piracy is about the only way you can do it. But the general rule about emulation is that it's not piracy if you own the game. So if you've got the physical game, you can go and download the ROM and do it that way. Now, if I'm wrong, please someone correct me, but that is what I believe is correct. And I've in the last, I've always been a fan of FIFA for every system, purely because it's the cheapest game you can get. I collected a copy of FIFA for each console that I had, and then about a couple of weeks ago, I thought, yeah, I'm going to start collecting FIFA for consoles that I've never had and I'm never going to own, and my collection has grown. But the bonus of that, of owning a physical copy of FIFA for the Mega Drive, is that I could legally emulate that. And I started looking through all of the games that I've got. I bought myself recently one of these. This is an Anbernic, and it's an emulation device. It's capable of handling 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit consoles. It's a convenient way of playing games. It's a convenient way of having lots of different systems in one spot. But to do it legally, you do need to have that system. No. You do need to own that game. So I went through my games collection and downloaded ROM versions of everything I had. So from Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, Atari 2600, all these different ones, and I run them on my console, on my little handheld portable emulation device. And it got me thinking, oh, I don't own a Mega Drive. I don't own an N64. I do own a Super Nintendo. I don't own a Mega CD. I don't own a Game Boy or a Game Boy Color anymore, but I do have games for those systems. I tend to buy a console, buy some games for it, then get fed up with that console, and generally get rid of the games with the console, but I do keep some of them hanging around. So I physically own lots of cartridges and discs for systems that I just don't have anymore or never had. Same with the Sega Saturn. I've got some Sega Saturn games floating around. But it got me thinking. You could just go out and buy games, second-hand games, cheap as chips. Go into a shop, pick up some budget PS1 games. I was going to say Dreamcast, but you don't buy budget Dreamcast. DS games. You cannot physically put that cartridge in another system, but there are some ways of emulating DS games that make them perfectly playable. So I've got a huge selection of games, probably about 80, 90 games covering 15 different systems, and yeah, so walk around, go into little CEX shops or retro shops, second-hand shops, but previously I've seen games and I thought that'd be a fantastic game to play again, but I don't really want to bung out for a whole console, especially because some of the retro consoles are expensive, and then I'd have to hook it up to a modern TV, run through all the problems you've got, just particularly for one specific game, and that is a tricky one. But if you follow the whole piracy emulation kind of thing, you could just go out and buy games and then run them via emulation in a ROM or an ISO or a GDI or whatever it is that format that they come in for that particular system. So that's what I've been doing. I looked through my collection of Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, Atari 2600 games, all games that I physically own. I can take you through and show you them if you don't believe me. I've got cartridges and discs and, well, that is it. It's cartridges and discs, really, isn't it? For various systems. Some of which I do own the consoles. So I've got my Atari 2600, Dreamcast, Super Nintendo. I can play those physical games on those systems. Technically, there's some 3DSs and things and DSs floating around in my house for that other people own. So I could go and play those games physically. But why? Why not? Why can I just download the ROM legally? Yeah, legally. I think, and do it that way. And that's what I've been doing, and that's what I thought about doing. Sort of last few days, and there are plenty of PlayStation 1 games that I'd love to play. I don't have a system. Actually, that's not true. I've got a PS2 sitting in there, a PS2 Slim, but it's far more convenient to pick up a little handheld device, slap some ROMs on, take it with you. You can have a huge game collection covering lots of different systems. Now, when I bought that, it did come with 5,000 games. I don't own 5,000 games, so technically they're all illegal, and downloading ROMs is illegal. Yeah, and sometimes the places you get them from are not the nicest of places with various pop-ups. But I'm going down the route, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, is that I can go and buy a game, I then physically hold it, it's in my hand, I do own it, I can then download the ROM and put it on whatever device I want to play it on, whether that be my Anbernic sitting there, or my modded Vita, or my modded DSi, or play it on my PC, laptop. Yeah. So it's put a whole new spin on the way I look at buying games. Before, like I said, I've been put off before by not owning the system, and obviously there are some devices and systems that are just super difficult to emulate. So PS3, Wii U, you do get into some very, very dark grey areas. Switch, let's not talk about Switch emulation, that's a bit of a sore subject in the gaming world at the minute. But for retro gaming, buying games for systems that you don't own, so that you can then download the ROM and emulate them and play them, it's a great way around not owning lots of kit. And it's not the way I've looked at it before. I've always owned stacks and stacks of consoles, whether it be handheld consoles, DSs, Game Boys. If I wanted to play a Game Boy game, I've gone out and bought a Game Boy to play that game, and it gets a bit much at times. So if you can emulate all of those games in one place, you then end up with just one device. You're technically not being illegal, because you are downloading that game that you physically bought, and some of these games can be very expensive on their own. Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, DS, Master System, all of those sort of retro games, Dreamcast games are hellishly expensive, but I do physically own a Dreamcast. But if you can then run those games somewhere else, why not? And that's what I've started doing. So I've got a huge selection of games, and like I said, I do own some older consoles like the SNES, Dreamcast, Atari, DS, Vita. So I'm not ditching all of my consoles, but I have just started going out and buying games for various systems that I don't own and probably won't ever own, just so I can probably feel better at myself. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that will just go, nah, I'm just going to download it. Who cares about Mega Drive? Who cares whether that's legal or not? but I'm not. Maybe I've got a bit more of a conscience than that. But any game you see on my channel, I physically own, or I have physically borrowed from someone. Not sure how that swings. But there's no downloading ROM. Don't need it. But on all of the ROMs I have for various systems, I physically own. Like I say, I do have a tendency to buy and sell consoles quite a bit. So some of the games that have been featured on previous videos I probably don't own anymore, and I won't use them again because I don't own the system or the game. But more recently I've started buying games for consoles I don't own. What do you think? Like, subscribe, enjoy.